Chapter 19. Ahsoka exhaled a sigh of relief. She was finally released from the med center located in the Jedi Temple. It was going to be at least another week before the sickly sweet smell of Bacta left her nose. Fortunately, she didn't need any further treatment. Master Skywalker had come to visit her a few times while she'd been unconscious, quite relieved to find her alive and in one piece. The Togruta teen could honestly swear that her master had been an overprotective Mother Ewok in a past life. Once she regained awareness, he had immediately returned to her side and stuck to her like glue. They were currently walking aimlessly through the temple. "How do you feel?" That had to be the 100th time she'd heard that question within the past 5 days. "Arg. I already told you, Master. I'm fine," she cried in slight aggravation. "All right, Snips. Just making sure." He raised his hands defensively with a grin, glad to hear that she was mostly back to her usual self. She sighed as she quickened her pace. It felt good to be walking on her own 2 feet again. Her leg was still a little sore but had healed wonderfully. According to the medic, there wasn't even going to be a scar left. She snapped her attention back towards her master at what he said next. "I just need you to know that I'm here for you if you need anything." Anakin stopped walking and placed a hand on her shoulder. Her master had to be giving her a subtle hint that he would eventually like to hear in explicit detail what had happened during her life-threatening duel with Zekalov. "I'm here to listen if you need to talk about anything," Skywalker continued. Definitely a subtle hint. "Thank you, Master. I don't really feel like talking right now. After being caged in the med ward for so long, I think I just need to get out and stretch my legs." "I totally understand," Anakin said with a smile. He himself had been wounded severely a few times in the past and knew that to be confined in one place for too long could drive a person stir-crazy. Ahsoka began heading for the nearest exit at the end of one of the halls, completely ignoring the hustle and bustle of Jedi students and Jedi Masters around her. She resisted the urge to roll her eyes in annoyance when she sensed Anakin trailing after her. "Yep. Overprotective. I know of a great place where we could go," Anakin exclaimed when he finally caught up with her. "Where?" Ahsoka admitted that she was genuinely curious. "Have you ever been to Tubadan's cafe?" Ahsoka gave him a quizzical look, silently answering his question. Anakin laughed at her expression and patted her on the back. "If you're hungry, they've got the best bantha steaks and Java juice this side of the galaxy." Ahsoka followed after her master, both of them leaving the Jedi Temple behind them. They both hopped into Anakin's personal speeder. He was up to something. Anakin flew them both up into a busy skylane. He had no trouble maneuvering through the hectic traffic and allowed the exhilaration of flying to ease his troubled mind. A few minutes of silence passed between them until the question that kept nagging at Ahsoka that was begging to be released was finally, released. "Okay, Master, I'm on to you. What's the catch?" Anakin glanced at her in apparent confusion. "The catch to what?" She really did roll her eyes this time. "Why you are taking me out to eat? I know that you want to know what happened. But please, understand that I don't want to talk about it right now." Anakin expertly flew down an exit lane to park near the cafe he spoke of. "Truthfully, I'm hungry. I just thought you'd like something other than cafeteria food to eat. As for what happened, you can tell me anytime you'd like, my dear Padawan." He hopped out of the speeder and then pointedly watched her climb out. She resisted the urge to facepalm. By the Force, he really was overprotective. The two walked into the diner and took a seat at a booth in the back. Anakin ordered a bantha steak and fries. Ahsoka perused the menu and after a few minutes, finally ordered something. She chose something simple: soup, bread, and a Java juice. This had been her second back-to-immersion episode in her entire life, and she learned from experience that after treatment, when it came to food, that it was smart to take it slow. It wasn't long before their food arrived and Ahsoka silently watched Anakin eat when he wasn't looking in order to gauge him, while she occasionally took a few bites of bread or a sip of soup here and there. Her master could be very good at hiding things from her. What startled her a few moments later was when she realized he had no force barriers in place. He was an open book to read, and she knew what was on his mind. Had he done that on purpose? "Master, it wasn't your fault." Anakin nearly choked on his food. He carefully swallowed, took a sip of Java juice, and spoke. "What are you talking about? Okay, that wasn't on purpose. You are blaming yourself for what happened to me." Anakin's face turned solemn. "That's because it is. If I had allowed you to come with me on my mission, you never would have gotten hurt." Ahsoka sighed and put her spoon down. "You don't know that for sure. I could have very well been injured on your mission too." Anakin shook his head in total disagreement. "Not a chance. I would have protected you. The Jedi Council made it clear that I was not to accompany you on your top-secret mission. It was out of your hands, Master. You are not to blame. Besides, I can take care of myself." "You nearly died, Ahsoka." Anakin's face reflected the agony he was feeling. He did blame himself for what happened to her, and he was angry with himself for not being there when she needed him the most. "Yes, and that wasn't your fault." "Well, I still think it is. It's my responsibility as your master to ensure your safety." Anakin heavily sighed and glared angrily at the table. "Master." Ahsoka spoke softly to get his attention. She wasn't able to finish her sentence because he beat her to it. "I had a Force dream and I saw your death, Ahsoka. That Sith apprentice killed you," Anakin snapped as he looked back at her, no longer able to hide his tumultuous feelings. "But he didn't. I'm still here, aren't I? I may be your Padawan, but you can't protect me forever. What will you do once I've become a Jedi Knight? I will be off on my own missions. Please, Master, understand that whatever happens to me in the future is not your fault." But the will of the Force, she reached out and grasped one of his hands in an attempt to comfort him. Anakin's face softened as his previous emotions simmered down. "Yes, but until that time, it is my responsibility to protect you," he frowned in a way that brooked no argument. Ahsoka remained quiet and took another sip of her drink, letting go of his hand. She looked down at her bowl of soup as the memories of her ordeal hit her like a ton of bricks. "If anyone failed, it's me." Ahsoka looked down at the table as her face burned with shame. Anakin stared at her as complete confusion marred his face. "What do you mean, Snips?" Ahsoka's face soon turned sullen and she bit her lip and looked away from him. Anakin was troubled by her sudden change in demeanor. "Ahsoka?" She closed her eyes. She didn't answer him. She was almost afraid to reveal the dark secret she'd been keeping to herself. Her eyes began to fill with tears, but she refused to let them fall. "Do you want to talk about it?" he asked softly in concern. He could clearly see that something had happened during the duel with the Sith apprentice. Something she never told anyone. "Master," Ahsoka's voice got stuck in her throat. She was almost afraid to tell him. "What would your Master Skywalker think of you, if he learned how dangerously close you have come to using the dark side?" Zikalov's words plagued her the moment she regained consciousness for the first time since the duel she had with him 5 days ago. His words had haunted her ever since. She looked down at the floor and remained tight-lipped. "How am I going to tell him? He's going to be so disappointed. I'm going to be in so much trouble for this." Ahsoka had a choice to make. She could either try to keep it a secret and forever drown in her guilt and shame, or come clean and rid herself of this heavy burden. After the time she'd already spent as Anakin Skywalker's Padawan, she knew that there were no secrets she could possibly keep from him. He always found out one way or another. With a deep breath, she lifted her head and with firm resolve she looked her master directly in the eye.
"Master, I used the dark side during the fight."
Anakin remained passive and simply listened. She couldn't sense his feelings or determine what he was thinking since his face was a neutral mask. It was starting to scare Ahsoka. Was he mad at her? "He told me it was my fault that my mission failed. Among other things. He made me so angry. I'm sorry that I failed you." She sought desperately to will the tears away as guilt consumed her. She really did feel like the galaxy's biggest failure. Ahsoka, Anakin mumbled softly. His voice was not filled with the condemnation that Ahsoka had been expecting. Anakin continued speaking. Everyone makes mistakes. No one is perfect. Every Jedi at some point in their lives get a taste of the dark side. It's up to us to choose whether or not we will take that path. You had a real reason to be angry. I know what it's like to be angry when engaging a Sith in a duel. Anakin smiled wryly as he revealed something else about himself that Ahsoka never knew. It's my fault that my mission failed. She raised her head to meet Anakin's questioning, cerulean blue eyes with her own watery ones. Anakin remained quiet and leaned back in his seat as he listened, his food utterly forgotten. Ahsoka continued. It's my fault that the data was lost. I was originally the one that was supposed to safeguard it, but I gave it to Sylvan instead so I could lure the Sith apprentice away. They died because of me. I wasn't there to help them. I couldn't save them. When he spoke again, his voice changed into one filled with comfort and compassion. That wasn't your fault either. That was a wise move and I'm proud of you. Your last-minute choice to give the intel to one of the Republic informants was a smart decision. You lured the Sith apprentice away in order to give them a fighting chance to make it out of there. Because of your quick thinking, they were not killed by the Sith boy, regardless of the outcome. You made the right call. Trust me. Ahsoka looked down at her soup bowl sadly and didn't appear as if she believed him. Hey, Snips, the Sith apprentice obviously had backup. He had help that you weren't aware of. Hell, that Sith apprentice wasn't even supposed to be there. How could that have been your fault? You didn't know. It was my responsibility to protect them and ensure that we would succeed. Look at what happened. The data was destroyed, so now we don't have it, and the 2 Republic informants are now dead because of my failure. I promised them that I would get them off that planet alive. Anakin shook his head vehemently. They knew the risks involved with the mission. The terrible thing about war is that comrades are often lost. Anyway, this is ridiculous. Here we are, the 2 of us having a serious argument concerning our different points of view about whose fault it was, and we aren't even looking at the entire picture. How did that boy know you'd be there? The Togruta teen looked up in sudden alarm. I honestly don't know, Master. He took me by complete surprise. Exactly. Listen, Ahsoka, there is something important I have to tell you. I had a Force dream that I actually shared with that Sith apprentice. It was a vision of the future. In the dream he killed you on Utapau, but there was something else about all of that bothered me. How did he know exactly when and where you would be, and somehow know in extreme detail what your mission would entail? Even I didn't know the details concerning your mission. That's information that only the Jedi Council knew about. Ahsoka's eyes widened as sudden realization dawned on her. Do you think there is a traitor among us? That seems highly unlikely, since the only ones that knew about it were the members of the Jedi Council. Unless one of the 2 Rhodians entrusted in your care broke their vows of silence. No, Master. I'm pretty sure they didn't. They both sat still for a second as the gears in their heads started turning. Do you think he can see the future? Ahsoka questioned slowly. Anakin hummed in thought. Maybe, but I honestly don't know. What I do know is that there is definitely something going on with that Sith boy that we don't know about. We need to get to the bottom of this, Master, Ahsoka said with all seriousness in regard to his previous question. Agreed, Anakin nodded. I think we should finish our food first. I second that. I don't work or think well on an empty stomach. Ahsoka smiled at his remark as she took another bite of her bread and a spoonful of soup. Anakin took another bite of his fries and glanced at the chronometer on his wrist. They needed to figure out where the boy was currently being held. He really wanted to grill him for answers. His thoughts were interrupted by Ahsoka's innocent question. You were just kidding, weren't you? Kidding about what? Anakin stared at her blankly with a bite of fries still in his mouth, completely unprepared for the drastic change in subject. About scrubbing the council chamber for a week, Ahsoka raised an eyebrow with a mischievous smirk. Well, I kind of was. I think you are in the all clear right now, Snips. At least until you're fully healed, he grinned widely. Well, technically, I finished my mission before yours. She gave him a look that basically said, I'm totally right, you are wrong, so prepare to scrub. Anakin laughed and shook his head. Yes, well, I made it back to the Jedi Temple first. Nope. Doesn't count. I completed my mission first. If it hadn't been for my injuries, I would have made it back long before you. Anakin nodded with a fond smile. All right, Snips. I'll give you that. You win and I lose. The two finished eating in companionable silence and Anakin paid for their meals. They both hopped into his speeder again and headed back to the Jedi Temple. The questions regarding the mysterious Sith apprentice continued to plague them both, and they wondered if the mystery regarding him would ever be solved. The son of General Grievous was now afraid. He'd lost all track of time. For all he knew, dawn could already be approaching. Zikalov was incredibly displeased with the number of times these Republic thugs kept drugging him. Especially after receiving the 5th shot. He was barely coherent half the time. He really hoped they didn't bring him before the Jedi Council like this. After experiencing the Jedi mind trick-induced interrogation at the merciless hands of Master Kit Fisto, he knew he wouldn't stand a chance before the Jedi Masters if he was still disconnected from the Force and was still pumped full of sedatives. His mind would in all likelihood easily bend to their will. That was not good. There was vital information he carried concerning the future that he couldn't allow them to have. Zikalov honestly couldn't see any way out of this one. He was doomed. The sedative after a while began to wear off and he once again tried to break free of his restraints to no avail. He despaired at the hopelessness of it all. They made him eat a couple of hours ago. Pretty bland, tasteless food that had practically been mush. Gross. His head jerked up at the sound of his cell door opening. 4 clone troopers entered the room. 2 more still stood guard just outside. One of the troopers approached and stood right next to him. All right, time to go. I'm going to remove these birth restraints. If you struggle or make a racket, we're going to have to bash you. Understand? Zikalov nodded quietly. He quickly learned a while ago that his screams and threats fell on deaf ears most of the time. Besides, cooperating now would give him the chance to look for another possible way to escape. The trooper freed him of the bonds restraining him to the bed and yanked him up by his shirt collar. He was still rather small and shorter than them by a good 2 feet. 2 of them stepped forward and grabbed him by his upper arms and began to shove him along, while the other 2 marched directly behind him. It was very awkward walking in force inhibitor shackles. The chain length wasn't long enough to run in. He could barely even walk in them. As they left the cell unit, the 2 troopers that had been guarding the door marched in sync directly in front of him. Now he was surrounded by 6 Republic clone troopers, each carrying a standard-issued blaster rifle. It struck him as odd that there was no Jedi Master here to escort him out of the cell block. They had to stop at a checkpoint in the prison in order to take him to the surface. A lone clone trooper that was stationed at the monitoring hub questioned them. He had red markings on his pristine armor that made him a high-ranking officer as compared with the rest of the clones escorting young Zikalov. Where are you taking this prisoner? One of the white-armored clone escorts answered without missing a beat. He was the one who had released Zikalov from the bed restraints back in the cell and had apparently appointed himself as leader. We have been authorized by Jedi Master Plo Koon to take this prisoner to Central Station for questioning. Zikalov had a bad feeling about this. Kenobi told him that they were protecting him from the public by keeping him locked up in this underground prison. These clones wanted to take him to a very public place? Why? The trooper behind the monitoring desk looked down at a datapad and shook his head in the negative. I see no such authorization here. Renegade Squad's leader took a step forward towards the sergeant and dared to oppose the high-ranking officer. We have clearance from the Jedi General himself, he insisted. The Sith apprentice knew that the only place he was meant to go aside from this prison cell was the Jedi Temple when the time finally came. Zikolov tried not to panic and enhanced a calm image. He watched and listened to the escalating argument with dread. All the while, that really bad feeling continued to persist. The red-striped, clone sergeant slowly stood up and exerted his authority. That may be so, but the prisoner is not to be moved until under the personal escort of a Jedi Master. This prisoner is coming with us, General's orders, the clone's voice lowered dangerously. No, he won't. Captain Rex's orders are still in effect. The sergeant's hand chopped through the air, emphasizing those last words. Perhaps you'd like to take this up with the General himself? No. That won't be necessary. The clone sergeant shook his head and looked down at the desk. The impudent, self-appointed leader of the clone squad believed that they were given the free pass to leave. While the sergeant was looking down at his datapad to confirm his orders, the 6 renegade clones turned away from the desk to go about their business, but the sergeant's words stopped them cold. Did I say you could leave? The clone sergeant questioned incredulously at their blatant disregard for authority. The 6 clones turned back around. Zikolov stood watching wide-eyed. He didn't have to have a connection with the Force to know that something horrible was about to happen. No one makes a move until I've finished reporting to the commander on duty first, or have you forgotten the chain of command? The sergeant stood tall and put a hand near his blaster in silent warning. The renegade clones remained silent. The sergeant continued on without preamble. Now, until you've received the proper clearance, I order you to return that prisoner back to the cell block. The sergeant pointed down the hall towards Zikolov's empty cell. That's an order we won't follow. Don't make us do something that we'll regret. The lead clone threatened. That's insubordination, trooper. This will have to be cleared with Captain Rex first. We have orders to take this prisoner. No, you do not have the authorization or the clearance. The clone sergeant angrily pointed an accusing finger at them. He reached down to open a comlink channel, most likely to alert Captain Rex of the situation. I'm going to have to inform Captai Arg. The clone sergeant screamed as he was hit by multiple blaster shots. His lifeless body fell forward and slumped over the control console. The console began to pour smoke and started sparking from all the damage. Someone will have heard that. One of the clone escorts muttered before pushing Zikolov forward. They met light resistance on the way, and approximately 5 clone troopers that opposed and tried to stop the traitors were killed in action. The 6 troopers shoved the Kalish boy into a turbo lift which took them up about 24 floors. They reached the surface and marched out with Zikolov in between them. It was still dark out. Zikolov couldn't tell if it was late evening or early morning. We need to hurry. It won't be long until Captain Rex is alerted. The 6 clones began to run, causing Zikolov to stumble and nearly faceplant a few times. They just lifted him up by his arms and kept him moving. Where are you guys taking me? Zikolov cried in confused dread. Shut up, you. One of the clones swiftly struck Zikolov in the head with the butt of his blaster rifle and stunned him into silence. It wasn't long before Zikolov slipped and fell. Unable to keep up thanks to the shackles on his ankles. One of the clones picked him up and slung him over his shoulder and carried him commando style. He began to fight back now that he realized these clones really were kidnapping him, to take him to God's new where. Hey, stop. Let me go. He punched the clone that was carrying him in the head with bound wrists. The armored clone simply ignored him and continued to run. Soon a loud siren went off. It wailed up and down in a synchronized rhythm. The dead sergeant along with the other 5 slain Republic troops had most likely been found by another clone, which meant that Captain Rex now knew that the prisoner was missing. Shit. Double time, men. Come on, move. We are almost there. The lead clone shouted above the loud din of the warning klaxon. They soon made it to a gunship and all but threw the Kalish boy in, where his small body slammed painfully against the interior wall. They soon encountered a major problem. The clone pilot that was supposed to lift off and take them out of there was missing. This is perfect. One of the clones spat in disgust. Flyby must have been a turncoat. We've got no bloody escape route now. What in the hell are we supposed to do? One of the clones shouted in complete disgust as he gestured animatedly at the clone leader. Over there. One of the 6 traitorous clones shouted. There were speeder bikes lined up on the tarmac. Quickly. You, Scuds. Take the boy with you. Clapper and Swift, you're his escort. We will split up and meet at the rendezvous point in the warehouse district. If any of you are followed and you can't lose them, fight for your lives. Surrender and failure are not an option. Yes, sir. The other 5 shouted together in unison. The one named Scuds roughly grabbed Zikalov's right arm and ordered him to get on the bike. The child shook his head and clumsily backed away. He turned and tried to run. That was a stupid move. The clone tackled him painfully and punched him in the head. He was hauled up by his tunic and lifted into the air. He was forced down on the vacant speeder bike seat. Scuds positioned Zikalov in front of him to keep him from falling off and to further secure his prize. Without warning, a sack made of black cloth was pulled over Zikalov's head, completely blinding him. The boy despaired. Without his sight, he would have no way of knowing where they were taking him and wouldn't be able to backtrack. The other 2 wingmen took their positions next to Scuds and the trio started their speeder bikes. The other 3 clones followed suit. The engines roared to life with throaty growls. A few seconds later, a squadron of clones and a uniformed officer ran outside and quickly spotted them. The uniformed officer blew a shrill whistle as another clone shouted at the fleeing traitors. You there. Halt. The clones that currently held Zikalov in their illegal custody zoomed off as if a hungry pack of Nexus were chasing them. They left the remote prison district behind them in no time. Soon they came upon a busy network of sky lanes that took them into the heart of the city. It wasn't long before they were followed. Zikalov's would-be rescuers finally caught up to them. Blaster fire filled the air as bolts of electrically charged plasma whizzed past their heads from behind. Split up. The lead clone shouted above all the ruckus. 3 of the 6 clones broke off from their formation and lured a few pursuers away from the ones that currently held Zikalov. One of the clones that accompanied Scuds, the one named Clapper, hit the brakes on his speeder and allowed 2 of the pursuers to fly past him. He hit the accelerator and began shooting at their rear engines from behind. One of the 2 blew up immediately while the second was hit, causing the engine to sputter and die out. Smoke filled the air as that clone's speeder began to spiral off, before exploding into a nearby building. Clapper returned to his previous post as Scud's wingman. Zikalov began to scream when the speeder he was currently on dipped down into a nosedive. The air rushed past, taking his breath away. At one point the cloth bag tied over his head had nearly been ripped off. That would have been preferable considering the fact that the rushing wind had the black bag smothering his unmasked face, making it difficult to breathe. The wailing sirens of the local police pierced the air, and with their flashing strobe lights mounted on the vehicles, they quickly joined the chase. Great, we've got the whole damn planet after us. Scud snarled in dismay. He pulled the speeder bike up out of the nosedive and sped through a narrow tunnel. One of the pursuing police vehicles that tried to follow but couldn't fit was unable to pull up in time and crashed. Broken and burning debris from the destroyed vehicle began falling thousands of feet into the deepening dark below. After exiting the tunnel, Scuds flew through oncoming traffic and then resumed the nosedive. Scuds expertly maneuvered through traffic patterns and narrowly avoided multiple collisions without batting an eye. Zikalov was really beginning to hate flying. Another police cruiser that had flown around the structure harboring the tunnel soon fell behind Scuds again. One of the policemen used a loudspeaker. Pull over immediately. This is the police. You have 30 seconds to comply. I'll take care of this, Scuds. Meet you at the rendezvous point. With those words, Swift veered away from the main group and took a different exit. 3 police vehicles followed him while only 2 remained on Scud's rear. Clapper. Do you think you can take care of them? It would be my pleasure. Clapper spiraled to the left and hit the brakes, pulling a similar move he had earlier on his clone brethren. He shot down the pursuing police vehicles from behind. Once they were dispatched, he joined Scuds on a flight path that took them deeper into the sublevels of Coruscant. It was an impoverished place that harbored every known kind of criminal and every low-life scum imaginable. The very poor who could not afford to live in the upper regions of Coruscant also occupied this section of the large metropolis. Only the dregs of society would call this place home. It was a dangerous place that few upstanding citizens dared to go. Very few law enforcement officials and Republic clones ever ventured this far down. Those that hated the Republic were known to inhabit this dark and dreadful place. The two clones had no desire to run into that sort of folk. The two clones flew past local bars and nightclubs and wove their way through many dilapidated apartment buildings, most of which were owned by slum lords. They tried their best not to draw unwanted attention to themselves, but that was rather hard considering the fact that they were still wearing their pristine white, clone trooper armor. They flew past a gunfight between two local gangs and just narrowly dodged the shots that went astray. After zooming through a narrow alley, they pulled up and began to accelerate at full throttle in order to leave the scuzzy, criminal syndicate-controlled area that inhabited this half of the lower region far behind them. They flew further north without a second glance back. "I think we lost them, Scuds. Come on, we need to regroup and meet with the others." The duo flew higher still, escaping out of the deepest levels of Coruscant. They made their way through a cluster of buildings. The black bag over Zekalov's head finally got blown off after a time, and the boy was so relieved it had. Hopefully his jailers weren't carrying any extra black bags with them. He silently took note of where the clones were taking him. If he had to hazard a guess, he would say they were currently near an industrial section of the vast city. Most workers were gone for the evening. The Kalish child wanted to know where they were taking him but didn't want to openly voice his question. Chances were slim that this clone he was currently flying with would even grace him with a response. What were their true motives? Were they working for someone or acting alone? He knew that he would find out soon enough. About 20 minutes later they arrived in the warehouse district. The clones landed and hid their speeders in a storage unit and then shoved Zekalov along. He silently did as they demanded and kept walking. They entered a large warehouse building that was stacked full of crates and boxes of all shapes and sizes. The clones, Scuds and Clapper, took him deeper into the building until they came to a central ring that more or less looked like an actual room due to the way the space was enclosed with stacked crates and shipping containers. 2 of the 6 clones were already there waiting for them. They stood from where they had been sitting on a few boxes and greeted their brothers. "Clapper, Scuds, I was almost afraid you wouldn't make it. It took a while to lose our pursuers. We made sure we weren't followed," Clapper said while crossing his arms. "Where is Avalanche and Skids?" "They didn't make it," one of the other 2 clones answered gravely. "No thanks to this little scumbag," Scuds growled as he tightened his grip on the child's arm. "Let's deal with him now." Clapper punched one fist eagerly into his open palm. "Hold on just a second. Let's not be rude, we forgot to introduce ourselves. It's only proper that our prisoner know our names before his death," the clone leader stated darkly while he stared at Zekalov. "I'm Rusty and this is Swift," he gestured first to himself and then to the clone standing to his right. "Not that it really matters," Swift muttered beneath his breath as he cracked his knuckles. The clones currently holding Zekalov's arms pushed him forward and threw him into the center of the ring. Zekalov's golden eyes darted from one clone to the next. Thankfully there were now only 4 of them rather than 6. So the 4 clones left were Clapper, Scuds, Rusty, and Swift. He wasn't sure why it was important that the boy made sure to memorize their names. "Why did you bring me here?" he nearly whispered with wide eyes. Rusty laughed at the boy's bewilderment. It wouldn't be long until the boy finally caught on to his life-threatening dilemma. "Why do you think we have you here, you stupid boy? Come on now, use that slow little brain of yours, the answer is simple." The 4 clones stood menacingly around him in their little circle and waited for the boy to answer. They were just waiting for the child to drown in his fear. You believe my father to be General Grievous, Zekalov replied flatly as he sent Rusty a glare. Maybe you're not as stupid as you led me to believe, Rusty chuckled rather darkly. You Republic lackeys are wrong. I'm not the son of General Grievous or a Sith apprentice. That's funny, you could have had me fooled. The clone named Scuds pulled out a small device and played a sound recording, namely the death threats that Zekalov had been screaming at them during his entire stay as Republic prisoner. Nice try, boy. How stupid do you think we are? Rusty scoffed as he took a step forward. You are all wrong, I'm telling you. I'm not who you think I am. The Kalish boy vigorously lied. Yeah, right. The clone named Swift punched him in the face, sending Zekalov reeling on his backside. Why are you doing this? Zekalov asked, trying to keep a steady voice as he crawled back to his feet. There was no need to let them know he was terrified. They would only do something far more terrible to him. You really aren't too bright, are you? Rusty shook his head in mock pity. Without warning he grabbed Zekalov and kneed him in the stomach before punching him in the head. That punch sent Zekalov down like a sack of raw, unrefined uranium. After the boy recovered himself he sat back up as his rage slowly began to build. I don't think there is any honor to be had out of torturing and killing a child, the boy frowned. Age doesn't matter when it comes to committing a heinous crime. Even children have to pay the price. Otherwise there would be anarchy among the masses. Did the Jedi Master Kit Fisto put you up to this? Zekalov spat, feeling his anger beginning to burn within him. That Jedi doesn't have the gall to hurt you, let alone order us to do some dirty deed for him. The Jedi are too soft. Then tell me who. The boy cried desperately. He had his own suspicions but he needed to be sure. Isn't it obvious? Many of our brothers died needlessly at the hands of that soulless monster, the one who has labeled himself as the general of the droid armies. It is here that you will pay for your father's crimes against the Republic. And for the murders you've both committed against innocent civilians and my fellow brothers. We have brought you here to enact true justice. Zekalov's countenance changed entirely. His silent questions had finally been answered. What his father said was true. Republic troops really did torture and kill children. He stood up and glared hatefully at them. If that's the case, you will wish you'd never met me. The four clones laughed at the young child. There he was, chained in force inhibitor restraints, looking small and pathetic. What damage could he possibly do? Zekalov casually rolled his neck and cracked stiff joints in the process as he narrowed his eyes at his tormentors. He gave them a very valuable piece of advice. Just a small suggestion. Whatever you do, you better make sure it kills me. 'Cause if it doesn't, you will be the ones to suffer. His defiant words sparked another round of raucous laughter from the four clones. It made Zekalov very angry. The Kalish boy growled a very sincere threat. If you don't believe me now, you will soon enough. Swift clutched his side in the midst of his laughter as he leaned against Clapper for support. We are shaking in our boots, kid. Clapper desperately tried to get his laughter under control. This is your last and only warning. Hurting me will only bring upon you unspeakable pain. Is that a threat I just heard? Scud snickered in clear amusement. Zekalov instinctively slid into a fighting stance regardless if he couldn't entirely achieve the desired effect due to the restraints. He raised his cuffed wrists and balled his hands into fists. No. That wasn't a threat, it was a promise. He snarled. I think it's high time we teach this little runt a lesson. The time has finally come for us to avenge our brothers. Rusty pumped his fist into the air with an ecstatic shout. With those words the clones lunged forward with the intention to viciously beat him to death. The boy surprised them though. Despite the fact he was chained up, he was rather fast for one so small. He easily ducked and rolled beneath a few of their kicks, and dodged and blocked some of their punches with his cuffed hands. Unfortunately it was nearly impossible for him to strike back at them due to the restraints. Zekalov couldn't defend himself forever. Soon he was overcome and fell to the floor as they mercilessly beat him. He wished he could use the force. Zikolov was now defenseless and at their cruel mercy. Not once did he utter any cries of pain. He'd grown quite used to physical punishment, no thanks to Count Dooku, and he had no intention to give his captors what they wanted. It seemed to frustrate and enrage them further when he refused to vocalize his pain. The child lay curled up on the ground as he took the abuse. There would be hell to pay if he survived this ordeal. It sure is an honor to be one of the few to beat the living daylights out of the son of General Grievous. You aren't your father, boy, but you are the next best thing, Rusty laughed in sick delight. They punched and kicked him until he lay bleeding. They stopped beating him, and the renegade clone leader appeared to be extremely frustrated with the fact that the boy hadn't yet voiced his discomfort or the pain he must currently be feeling. You have been trained well, boy. That alone won't stop you from screaming this time. Scuds took out a shock baton and twirled it expertly between his fingers. Rusty took it upon himself to educate the Kalish boy. We use these on the worst of criminals. On average, an adult body can withstand 60 jolts before death. You, however, might withstand half that much. Zikolov tried not to panic as Scuds lowered the baton to lightly touch his bruised leg as a demonstration. He squirmed to get away, but one of the clones held him firmly in place. After the glowing, pulsating blue baton made contact with his injured body, the powerful energy currents made his body jerk painfully in response. This new form of torture swiftly began. Whenever they touched the shock baton against his body, it made him spasm and convulse as though he were getting struck by Sith lightning. After withstanding the first 9 shocks, his weak body finally gave them what they wanted. Zikolov couldn't stop the screams from painfully ripping out of his throat in the midst of his agony. The son of General Grievous wasn't sure how long they tortured him, but it felt like hours. Just when Zikolov thought it couldn't get any worse, one of them pulled out a blaster rifle and changed the setting from stun to kill. The boy's eyes widened in severe alarm. They were either going to kill him or do something much, much worse. You know that clone you shot in the leg back on board Kit Fisto's Republic cruiser? Zikolov remained silent. He remembered quite well. He'd shot that trooper in a desperate attempt to escape. He's my bunk mate, Clapper growled angrily. Without warning, the clone shot the boy in the leg, earning another agonized scream. Zikolov couldn't stop the tears from flowing and hated feeling so helpless and weak. This was becoming unbearable. He couldn't believe he was even thinking it, but he was starting to believe that the suffering he was enduring had to be worse than anything Dooku had ever done to him in the past. Now this is how true justice should be enforced. It won't be long until your father suffers the same fate, boy. Swift cracked his knuckles before delivering a well-aimed punch to Zikolov's exposed midsection. No, you are wrong. My father will avenge me. You'll wish? Why you had never touched me, Zikolov groaned painfully in response as his breath began to rattle around in his lungs. He shuddered to imagine the extent of his current injuries. Honestly, it felt like they'd broken virtually every bone in his body. He's not coming to save you. You are on Coruscant, you stupid boy. You are standing in the very heart of the Republic. What's more, we are all virtually the same. How could your father find 4 of us out of 4 million? Rusty laughed cruelly. The other clones shouted and hollered in victory. It seemed as if they'd already labeled him as dead. Any last words, separatist filth? The clone renegade leader asked as he pointed the blaster rifle at the boy's head. None you'd want to hear, the Kalish boy growled weakly. The weak growl had come out more like a whisper. If he had the strength, he would have made a very profane hand gesture just then. In that case, our fun little game ends here. The clone adjusted his blaster with an audible click and then prepared to pull the trigger. On my mark, men. 3. Zikolov looked up from where he was laying on his back, broken and defeated, to stare into the dark black barrel of the clone's blaster rifle. As he defiantly stared death in the face, he realized that he was no longer afraid, although he wished he'd had the honor of slaying a few of his enemies before his untimely demise. 2. The other 3 clones aimed their blaster rifles at Zikolov, all of them clicking their guns from stun to kill and prepared to pull the trigger on Rusty's command. The renegade clones never had the chance to execute him. They were robbed of the chance to complete their errand of vengeance when his rescuer miraculously and quite unexpectedly appeared. "Hold it right there," his savior firmly commanded. Rusty and the clones snapped their attention around to look at the approaching figure. Rusty aimed his blaster at the newcomer and snarled with the most venom he could muster. "You!" Zekalov could hardly believe who had come to rescue him. Chapter 20. Captain Rex cursed when he first received the report that the prisoner that the Jedi entrusted him with had been abducted. The captain was in the middle of a court-martial hearing, dealing with a recent clone deserter, when news reached him of the sergeant's death. The sergeant had been one of Captain Rex's most trusted men. He was extremely enraged to learn that 6 of his troopers had gone rogue simply to carry out a revenge scheme, one that Obi-Wan had warned him might happen. He was even more furious to learn that the 6 traitorous clones had murdered 5 more brothers in cold blood on their way out of the prison complex. With the Jedi's approval, they wasted no time in sending out a worldwide broadcast concerning the 6 traitors and mentioned in the news report that they had a captive with them, but never revealed the boy's identity. The Sith apprentice was already in enough trouble. The last thing they needed were bounty hunters, assassins, and news reporters targeting the child. The captain was pleased, however, when 2 of the renegade clones were captured. They put up a fight but ultimately lost in the end and were now imprisoned. They were questioned and interrogated, but they refused to provide the coordinates where their fellow brethren had taken their highly prized prisoner. They were now facing a most serious trial. Captain Rex and his loyal troops were quite lucky to receive a tip from a local citizen who had seen them flee to the warehouse district. He and his search and rescue team combed through the majority of the grounds. They were immediately alerted when they heard the echo of a single blaster shot and the boys' screams emanating from a warehouse about a click south. Captain Rex's team boarded their gunship and flew to that vicinity with all haste. 2 escorting gunships also accompanied them. They had to land a quarter of a mile away to avoid alerting the perpetrators of their presence. Once close enough, they proceeded on foot. They had to be stealthy enough to catch the turncoats red-handed. The captain and his team surrounded the building and blocked all exits. They had a force of 35 troopers since all search and rescue units spread out in the entire district had been called to the captain's position for reinforcement. There was no telling what the Sith boy's condition was or if he was free of his bonds, and Captain Rex refused to allow the renegade clones a chance to escape. Rex and 3 of his most loyal troopers accompanied him inside the dimly lit structure. It was time to catch those villains. They made sure they weren't going in completely blind. They used scanners to detect the heat signatures of the 4 renegade clones and pinpointed their exact position. "Trapper and Slider, I want you to go around to the north end and flank them. Cover us while Ace and I move in," Rex spoke quietly while pulling out his twin blaster pistols. The rest of his team nodded silently and then ran stealthily through the maze of crates to carry out his orders. Captain Rex ran forward swiftly when he heard the child cry out in pain again. Ace followed him and they soon reached ground zero. They kept their backs to a crate and peered around the corner to see 4 of the traitors aim their blasters at the boy who was lying on the floor in a terrible condition. They heard the renegade leader snap one last question. "Any last words, separatist filth?" Rusty cruelly asked of the child. The clones hiding behind the crates were unable to hear the boy's weak response. Captain Rex whispered to his comrade beside him. "We are going to crash their little party on my mark." Ace nodded silently, acknowledging his order. They both heard the traitorous clone named Rusty begin to count down from 3. Captain Rex's fears were confirmed. They were going to execute this boy. He nodded silently to Ace and then loudly whispered his next order. "Now." Captain Rex and Ace popped out from behind their cover and aimed their blasters at the 4 turncoats. "Hold it right there," Captain Rex ordered with a dangerous edge to his voice. He had no qualms about shooting the renegade troopers if they chose to do something stupid by disobeying his command. The 4 clones now caught, aimed their blasters at Rex and Ace. "You." Rusty took a step forward in challenge. "We have the building completely surrounded. Now put your blasters down. There is no need for further violence." Captain Rex narrowed his eyes from behind his helmet. "You shouldn't have interfered," Rusty snapped. "And you should have considered the consequences before engaging in such a foolish plan. You are facing serious charges, Trooper." Rex countered him. "Don't you understand? We are doing this for the greater good." Rusty jerked his blaster rifle forward a few more inches as his voice rose in volume. The crazed clone reached down and hauled a dazed Zikalov to his feet and held the child in front of him as a hostage. The child had blood running out of his nose and it leaked out of his swollen mouth. It looked as if he could barely stand. Despite the fact the Kalish boy had reddish, scaly skin, Captain Rex could already see telltale signs of a black eye. His other eye was swollen shut. One of the tusks on his face was clearly fractured. The boy was wheezing for breath and one of his legs looked broken. As Rex's eyes silently and carefully scanned the child from head to toe, he noticed the blaster wound on the boy's leg. If that cauterized wound wasn't treated soon, it would get infected and would start bleeding out. If it wasn't for the crazed, rogue clone that currently held him up, the child would undoubtedly be lying in a bloody heap on the floor. Rusty rested his blaster barrel against the child's temple in clear warning. "This boy is our enemy. Or have you forgotten? This prisoner is unarmed. Look at him, he's just a kid. Do you want that kind of blood on your hands?" Rex tried to reason. "Drop your weapons, or this boy's death will be on your hands. I have the feeling that you are willing to kill him regardless." Captain Rex growled in response, as he tightened his hold on his weapons. "Drop your guns now or I'll shoot," Rusty shouted angrily as his grip on the boy tightened, eliciting a pain-filled moan from Zikalov. "Come on now, Rusty, think about what you are doing." "I know what I am doing. I'm avenging our fallen brothers," Rusty angrily yelled as he shoved the blaster barrel further into the side of Zikalov's throbbing temple. "Revenge will not bring them back. They died with honor on the battlefield as any soldier might." "You are wrong. They were murdered by those separatist cowards and by those heartless droids. Now do the smart thing and drop those guns. This is your last warning," Rusty angrily shouted as he shook Zikalov's beaten body, in emphasis earning a pain-filled cry. "All right, Rusty, take it easy." Captain Rex gave Ace a subtle nod and the two of them slowly crouched down to place their guns on the floor. They stood up with their hands raised once they were disarmed, now completely at the renegade trooper's mercy. "Smart choice. Surely you know by now that the son of General Grievous must die." Rusty's hand that held the blaster began to shake. "That may be so, Rusty, but no one made us judge and executioner," Rex continued to try to reason with the madman. "If this child is allowed to live, he will grow up to be just like his father and will kill millions." Trapper and Slider appeared high up near the rafters on top of some of the crates directly behind Rusty. Captain Rex was thankful he had his helmet on, or else the rogue troopers would have seen his eyes dart upwards. Trapper and Slider began their slow, stealthy descent from above. Now Rex knew that all he had to do was keep Rusty talking. "How can you know that for sure? Just look at what he's done already. Are you that blind? Together, they will destroy us all." "You don't know that for certain," Rex shook his head. "Haven't you listened to this little rat's death threats? He's got dark Jedi powers and is too dangerous to be kept alive. His fate will be determined by the Jedi. It's not for us to decide. If we kill him now, we can save all our brothers." "Our brothers? You murdered 6 of them. You are no better than those heartless clankers." Captain Rex snarled as he pointed a finger at Rusty in clear accusation. "They were collateral damage. They were protecting this thing," Rusty sneered down at the battered, nearly unconscious Kalish boy. "That doesn't give you the right to murder our own brothers or the right to kill this child. Think about what you are doing." Captain Rex gave a subtle nod to his 2 men above them while arguing with the renegade leader. Trapper and Slider prepared to take down the rebels. How could you let this steaming pile of bantha shit live? Do you know how many of us he's killed? Rusty snarled angrily. He hasn't killed any of our brothers, Rusty. Captain Rex shook his head sadly at his delusional subordinate. Lies. He's murdered hundreds. No, he hasn't. The Jedi General Kit Fisto interrogated this boy on board his ship. The boy answered his questions truthfully. He's only wounded or stunned troopers. No casualties. He's innocent of murder. Rusty aimed his blaster at Captain Rex as his hand kept shaking. I don't believe you. This is a trick. No, it isn't, Rusty. Would your commanding officer lie to you? The renegade clone leader hesitated as he considered Rex's question. Captain Rex thought it wise to address the other 3 renegade clones who now appeared baffled with this new information. You 3, this is your last chance. Drop your weapons. That's an order. The 3 renegade clones glanced at each other as if silently debating on whether or not they should obey their commanding officer. Captain Rex continued to persuade them. If you surrender now, the consequences will be less severe. Continue to resist and you're facing immediate death penalty by firing squad. You are all smart enough to know that. One by one the other 3 renegade clones dropped their blasters to the ground with heavy clatters and walked forward with their hands raised in surrender. Ace kept his weapon trained on them as they moved to stand on the sidelines. Make one wrong move and I'll blast you, Ace growled threateningly. At that moment a squad of Rex's troops invaded the arena and took the 3 renegade clones into custody while the remaining ones aimed their blasters at Rusty. You're all making a big mistake. By saving this boy you are condemning us all to death. Rusty screamed at all of them in rage. That distraction gave Trapper and Slider the window of opportunity that they needed. They slid down the last few boxes they had been steadily climbing down from and took Rusty down. Trapper took the butt end of his blaster rifle and swiftly struck Rusty in the back of his head near his neckline, immediately dropping him. Slider grabbed the renegade leader's arms and pulled Rusty's hands behind his back. He took a pair of cuffs and slapped them on Rusty's wrists and then hauled him up and carried his unconscious form out of the warehouse. Zekalov had been thrown from the crazed clone's grasp and fell down to the ground. He screamed as stars exploded in his vision. He felt paralyzed as his body began to go numb. His severe injuries had been greatly aggravated when his body hit the floor. He moaned and stared up at the ceiling as his vision swam. Captain Rex knelt down next to him and ripped his helmet off. "Kid, can you hear me?" It was interesting to finally see the man's face. So this is what every clone trooper looked like beneath the helmet? This clone's face looked haggard and worn, and when he locked eyes on Zekalov's, the Kalish boy could see deep regret shining within them. His savior looked down on him with worry as he gently checked him over for injuries. This was not the rescuer he'd imagined would come for him. Come to think of it, he hadn't expected any sort of rescue. This clone cared about him after the others had tried to kill him. Why? Weren't they all the same, all of one mind? Zekalov's thoughts began to slow as he found it more difficult to breathe. The 6 clones that had tried to kill him, no, the 4 that had been trying to kill him, all had unique names. They weren't all the same despite the fact that they all shared the same genetic code and all had the same identical face. The clone currently kneeling above him looked different for some reason. He'd only seen one other clone without a helmet on. It had been the clone officer that tried to stop his kidnappers on the airfield. But Zekalov could tell that his rescuer was somehow different from all the rest. He could see it in his eyes. Captain Rex appeared haunted, like he'd seen dark, terrible, and unimaginable things. No thanks to the war, the boy presumed. What had this clone seen and what had he experienced? Zekalov wasn't sure why he entertained such questions. He was a Sith apprentice. He wasn't supposed to care. Maybe it was the fact that he was still a curious child despite his advanced training. Maybe it was the fact that he was dying. Zekalov closed his eyes for a moment as that thought pulverized his mind. I'm dying? Stay with me, kid. The clone captain shouted as Zekalov began to fade. It was weird that the clone trying to save his life found his life even remotely valuable. Surely they knew about the attempted murder on Ahsoka's life and of his murderous intentions towards the rest of them. Zikaloff thought the troops that arrived a few minutes ago were just going to help Rusty finish him off. Zikaloff felt the clone gently cradle his face in his hands, and Rex almost appeared as if he were going to cry. Why would a Republic clone trooper cry for him? He didn't even know him. He didn't know what he was capable of. They were all supposed to hate him. They were all supposed to kill him like the Six had intended. What the Four had nearly done just a moment ago. They were at war. He was the son of General Grievous. What was he to them? A hostage? A bargaining chip? A criminal, a Sith apprentice, an enemy, a murderer? That last thought struck Zikaloff as funny. He hadn't murdered anyone. At least not yet. Ahsoka was meant to be his first real kill. She got away. His mind began to race as he thought back on his life. Dooku made him kill that one man, the one with the Republic tattoo. It was dishonorable. He was an unarmed prisoner. Zikaloff wasn't meant to be an executioner. He was a warrior. He was meant to kill, but only on a battlefield. Unlike the Sith, perhaps even unlike his father, Zikaloff did not take delight in the prospect of ending a life. He was only going to kill out of necessity. No, Zikaloff reasoned, he wasn't a murderer. Captain Rex leaned an ear against Zikaloff's chest to find that the boy was no longer breathing as he checked for his pulse. Zikaloff's hearing soon became muffled as he heard Captain Rex screaming for a medic. He didn't even realize that his handcuffs and shackles had been removed. He stared up at the captain with glassy eyes. "Come on, kid, don't die on me." Rex's face contorted into one of pain. Zikaloff was supposed to turn 13 within the month. He wanted to return to Cali. He wanted to meet the rest of his family. What he really wanted was to tell his father goodbye. He knew that he would never get the chance. His dreams were for naught. He felt his heart begin to slow. Captain Rex stared down at him and said something that Zikaloff could barely hear. He was able to lip-read his last words. "Don't you dare die on me now, kid." Zikaloff stared wordlessly up at the despairing clone captain as he felt his heart render one last beat. His body soon felt light and fuzzy. It almost felt like he could fly. The son of General Grievous didn't close his eyes. He didn't need to. A bright light filled his vision and everything went completely white. The clone medic came and all but shoved Captain Rex aside in order to get to the child. After examining him, he shook his head. "I can't give him chest compressions to restart his heart, his ribs are broken." The clone medic took a syringe filled with a strong stimulant out of his medical kit and jammed it into the side of the child's neck. He checked him over and made sure that none of the boy's broken ribs had pierced his lungs. He then made a frantic, waving gesture for one of his assistants to quickly aid him as he took out a portable defibrillator. "Everyone stand back." He rubbed the two shock pads together. "Clear." He gently pushed the defibrillator pads down on the boy's chest, being mindful of his injuries, and jolted him with 800 volts in the hopes it would restart his heart. Still nothing happened. "I'm going to try this again, clear." The clone medic performed the procedure another 2 times and increased the electrical charge, sending first 1000 and then 1700 volts coursing through the flat-lined patient. He pressed 2 fingers against the boy's neck and checked the child's aortic artery for a pulse. A few seconds later the medic sighed in relief. "All right, we've got a pulse, but it's very weak. What injuries I've managed to ascertain are severe, but I've stabilized him. We need to get him to a medical triage facility immediately." "Do what you have to do," Jolt. Captain Rex sighed heavily as he ran a hand over his face in relief. He carefully watched 2 clones assigned to Jolt's medical team gently lift Zikaloff's body and put him on a stretcher. The clone medic followed the troops carrying his patient while Captain Rex trailed after them. Jolt was one of the best field medics in the galaxy, and Captain Rex was so lucky and very grateful that he had him on his unit. Within the past 7 months, Jolt managed to save 5,402 wounded troopers on the battlefield. Once released from Camino after graduating with high honors at the training academy, he'd been on the front lines from the very beginning and served under Captain Rex's command since that time. Jolt, I'm coming with you. I'm not letting this boy out of my sight after what happened here. I'm going to contact Commander Cody, Jedi Master Plo Koon, and General Kenobi immediately. I want you to keep me posted on his condition. Yes, sir. Jolt nodded his head in the affirmative as he and his team loaded the injured boy into a small, medical transport. Once they were all on board, they flew away from the warehouse district and sped towards the aforementioned triage facility like a tuskcat out of hell. Captain Rex reported directly to Commander Cody of the situation almost immediately after rescuing Zekalov. The commander had been gracious enough to take it upon himself to take Captain Rex's report and pass it on to General Obi-Wan Kenobi and Jedi Master Plo Koon. The boy is being treated now as we speak. The 6 clones that are responsible for the kidnapping, assault, and intended murder of the boy have been court-martialed and are standing trial for those charges in addition to the murders they committed against their acting sergeant and 5 of their fellow troopers, Commander Cody grimly reported to the holographic images of General Obi-Wan Kenobi and Master Plo Koon. Where is the boy currently being treated? Obi-Wan questioned gravely. The Herald Triage facility a few clicks northeast from the prison complex he was previously being contained in. We have kept his whereabouts top secret. What is his current condition? Master Plo questioned with a sense of dread. Not good, I'm afraid. He's suffered blunt force trauma to nearly 85% of his body. He's got a major concussion and he has internal bleeding which the surgeons are working on right now. I don't currently know the full extent of his injuries. I'm still waiting on the full report. Keep us updated on his condition. The Jedi Council is being informed of this incident. We originally wanted to question the boy, but Master Yoda does not believe it would be wise for him to be brought before the Council until his condition has improved. Yes, sir, but right now it's too soon to know an approximate recovery time. He's practically knocking on death's door. I'm sorry for this turn of events, generals. Commander Cody lowered his head regretfully. He was willing to take the blame. After all, Republic clone troopers were the ones responsible for the intended murder of the child. Jedi Master Plo Koon will be arriving at the Herald Triage facility within the hour. We cannot risk the chance that this incident may reoccur. Obi-Wan didn't bother hiding his disappointment. I have an elite guard posted at the facility. The boy will remain safe this time. Yes, but can your troops be trusted, Commander? Obi-Wan's face spoke volumes of his displeasure. Yes, sir. I handpicked these men myself, General. They are the most trusted and most loyal troopers I could ever ask for. Very well, Cody. I am on my way now, Jedi Master Plo Koon stated and then cut his own transmission, leaving Obi-Wan and Commander Cody to continue their conversation. Cody, I want Captain Rex to guard this boy until Jedi General Plo Koon arrives. What happened proves that many soldiers hold a deep grudge against General Grievous. I'm counting on you and Rex to ensure this doesn't happen again. Yes, sir. You can always count on us. I always do, Kenobi smiled. They both said farewell and ended the transmission. Commander Cody ran a hand through his hair and picked up his helmet from where he'd set it down on the console. Once Grievous caught wind of the Republic's murderous exploits against the child, Cody honestly didn't want to think of the consequences. There was nothing more frightening than a father's retribution. General Grievous wished this ship would fly faster. If only he could miraculously teleport. He was still 2 days from reaching Coruscant. He was quite surprised when a bounty hunter by the name of Cad Bane managed to contact him with news regarding his son. Greetings, General. I have valuable information that I believe you may find useful. The bounty hunter tipped his hat by way of greeting. What do you wish in return? Grievous narrowed his eyes. Bounty hunters almost always bargained in exchange for valuable intel. The general was very cautious. They were sometimes unpredictable and their word could not always be trusted. He listened intently. "There is no fee. My employer already paid me quite handsomely just to contact you. Go on." He wondered if Count Dooku was the one to pay this messenger. There was a bounty posted on 6 Republic clone troopers not long ago. The broadcasts stated that they had a captive with them. An eyewitness managed to take a snapshot of the abductee. Cad Bane showed Grievous the picture. The image was slightly blurry, indicating that the clones had been in motion, but there was a fairly distinguishable outline that the general knew all too well. It was his son. He had no doubt. His son was held securely against a clone trooper on a speeder bike. "Do you know where they have taken him?" Grievous questioned hopefully as he leaned forward. There was a local citizen that gave the Republic a vague tip on where they might have gone. He was last seen in the warehouse district. "Did your employer pay you to rescue him?" "No, there was no need. He was rescued by a garrison of clones." The bounty hunter took his hat off and dusted it off casually before putting it back on. Grievous sighed in relief and pushed aside his hate for the Republic troopers for a moment. As long as his son lived, that's what was most important. His sense of relief was soon cruelly shattered at what the bounty hunter said next. "This is not why I have contacted you." The Kaleesh cyborg narrowed his eyes. "Then what was the purpose of your call?" "Regrettably, your son is now dead." "What? No, that couldn't be possible." Grievous refused to believe it. "Do you have solid proof of the boy's demise?" Grievous questioned carefully as fear began to gnaw away at his rapidly beating heart. "He died of his wounds approximately 3 hours ago. This photograph was taken by a Republic crime scene unit." The picture the bounty hunter was showing him was magnified so he could get a clearer look. His heart nearly stopped. There was his son, broken, bloodied, and beaten. His eyes stared up lifelessly, and next to him was a clone medic. The medic's hand was raised in the universal sign that the child was pronounced dead. No. This couldn't happen. He was so close. So close to rescuing his son. The 6 clones that tortured and killed him are still alive and awaiting trial. There was only one goal left in mind now. Where are they? Grievous's voice was dark and promised death as he slowly clenched his cybernetic hands into fists. "They are being detained in the same detention center your son was in. I am sending you the coordinates now." The general of the droid armies watched the data stream into his ship's database with dark satisfaction. "Tell no one of this conversation or I'll be sure to put a bounty on your head," the Kaleesh cyborg growled in warning as he pointed a sharp, metal talon at the bounty hunter's holoimage. "You have my word." Cad Bane bowed his head respectfully before cutting the transmission. General Grievous did not openly voice his feelings to the bounty hunter. He refused to believe his son was dead. He needed to see Zekalov for himself. If it was true, Grievous would be sure to recover his body and bury him on their homeworld of Cali. Those wicked Republic clone troopers were going to stand trial. His trial. They were going to suffer the cruelest of death penalties. General Grievous was going to ensure that his son was truly avenged. Dark feelings began to bubble out of his aching heart and rose to the surface unbridled. He raised his head to the ceiling and unleashed a bone-chilling cry. If someone had been around to hear it, they wouldn't be sure if it was a scream of rage or of agony. To the general of the droid armies, it was both.